7:30 p.m. The items on the agenda were a presentation on bond refinancing for Linden and Cornerstone. So we have a presentation that's going to be made here today. We also are going to just have a preliminary discussion, mostly around timing and what we might see on our council floor, on our general council agenda coming up this Tuesday. The third item was open and significant claims against the city. That we're gonna have to scratch that for the next meeting. I was hoping to get a latest and greatest listing, but I didn't have that ready for this. So we'll scratch that from the agenda. It'll just be focus on the presentation on bond refinancing and then what we need to do on the upcoming agenda item for general council, similarly for the FRP 2021. So I know we have a kind of a big presentation, but there was a guest speaker who wanted to come up on an agenda topic. Was it around the bond refinancing?
In general.
Okay.
I can wait until you get on.
Cool. Yeah, please come to the floor and give kind of our presentation.
I think Angie will probably provide most of the substance here. I don't have anything real formal, frankly. But I can just give you a real quick. Angie, do you want to start, or do you want me to just give a little bit of background?
Oh, go ahead. You can start, Matt.
Okay, so just from a conceptual level, what we're doing here, and Angie will put some more detail and numbers to it, but there is some outstanding debt that was issued by the city that's secured by your TIF revenues that was issued in connection with the Linden Point project and the Cornerstone project. Both of those bond issuances or debt obligation issuances that are outstanding right now are able to be refunded. What we are analyzing is our ability to refinance basically that outstanding debt at lower interest rates. The result is there's additional funds that's available for potentially for future public improvements, or if it's not needed for that purpose, to go to the city at some point in the future once the TIF has expired. The legal element of it is, again, it's conceptually relatively simple. We're working with the Port of Greater Cincinnati Development Authority's bond fund. The involvement of the bond fund, it provides greater security for holders of the refinancing debt. The idea there is to further reduce interest rates and get a larger financial benefit to the city. We're currently in discussions with them. They have their own due diligence process and requirements to go through their program that we're working with them to advance this project. That's sort of where we are in the process at this point. So I think that maybe it's helpful for Andy to give maybe some numbers to this so you can get your head around what we're looking at from the financial side. And then I can, or Andy can discuss procedurally how to move forward from here and what additional procedural steps we'll need to go through to kind of hopefully get to the eventual refinancing. So does that sound good, or do you have any questions for me before Andy?
I had one quick question.
Yes, sir.
Does the Port Authority do they provide like favorable rates different to what we could get otherwise? Is that one of the benefits of going through them? Because we're getting a special pool, a special treatment sort of thing?
Yeah, there's two separate ways to do this with Port Authority involvement. One is to just have the Port Authority be the issuer of your bonds. Mm-hmm. And in that case, they're more of just a conduit. They serve sort of as an entity to be, to get some of this off the Port Authority's books to some extent, frankly, and just to have them as a pretty common market participant issue your bonds. What we're looking at here is that they also, in addition to the Port Authority itself, they have partnered up with the Montgomery County Dayton Montgomery, I forget exactly what their name is, basically the Dayton Montgomery County Port Authority. And they have a bond fund, and in that fund is actual, there's millions of dollars in it to potentially draw upon if the city's obligation to use their money to pay the debt fails. They also have a line of credit from a bank that's there to protect the potential bondholders too. So going through that bond fund basically gives a bunch of extra resources to repay those bondholders. And therefore, those bondholders, demand a lower interest rate.
Yeah, because
just think of it literally as a fund, a big pool of money they could draw on to pay those bondholders if the revenues that we are going to make available are insufficient to pay the debt.
They have a good credit rating, right? A- or something like that.
Yeah. So they get rated. They're again a common market participant. They're out there. They're a known quantity, and it can, again, just provide that beneficial interest rate so that we can get more savings if we're able to advance through the process.
That was very clear. Thank you.
Sure. Anything else?
Nope. Andy, if you wanted to.
I'll be right here. Just
Yeah, I'll jump in here. Good evening, everybody. Pat did a great job with describing, what's planning to happen here. The bond fund really acts as a credit wrap, and so it does. When we evaluated, got engaged with the city, we evaluated all the TIF districts, and also evaluated the debt that was associated with those TIF districts. And so Cornerstone was one that we recognized right away had potential to be refunded currently without any penalty. And so currently there's about $8.6 million in debt outstanding. And the interest rate on that is at 6.2%. And so just to give you a snapshot of the benefit of using the Port Authority, we can now access the market at lower rates and get into the 2.5% range on the bonds, and so that really enables us to save a lot of money on Cornerstone specifically. And I'm talking about that one first because these are two different TIFs, obviously, but with Cornerstone, the benefit of doing this really is going back to, in essence, the developer or the current owner of those office buildings, those three office buildings, and then the net rents that they would charge to the folks that are there. And so in terms of the savings that we are looking at currently, we talk about savings as a percentage when we look at refunding bonds, and this one currently is sitting about 17% savings, which is pretty significant and phenomenal, to be honest with you. We typically look at these refinancings, and when it's above 3 to 5% is always sort of the industry standard and a good time to possibly take a look at refinancing the bonds. And related to the bond world, we can't do that like maybe our mortgage, where you can refinance that over and over again whenever you have an advantage. There's some lockout provisions and time frames as to when we can do that for bonds, and so we want to make sure we capture that at the right moment. And so we feel that these two in particular are a good time for us to take a look at right now and attain those savings. When it comes to what the annual savings looks like for these issues, and again, staying on Cornerstone first, we're probably about $1.5 million in savings. And that equates to about it varies each year, but $260,000 to $300,000 a year in savings. This is very important on the Cornerstone piece because the last couple years, the TIF revenue that's generated from that site is not sufficient enough to pay debt service, so we've been drawing down on the city's TIF fund to make those debt service payments. This will sort of right the ship. And with this refinancing, there will not be a deficit forecasted in the future on this TIF district in these bonds. What happens when there is a shortfall, and if we don't refinance this bond this year, there will be about roughly, I think, a $200,000 shortfall that the property owner would then have to make a payment on those bonds, the difference, and that's obviously, would get passed on to the tenants there by raising their rents in effect.
Which would hurt the city.
Stop there and see if there's any questions related to the savings on the Cornerstone piece. So again, no benefit to the city financially with this refinancing, but a huge benefit to those office users at that site.
Hold on. Do you have any questions?
I'm good at that.
I'm going to switch over to Linden Point if we could, because that is the Paycor area on that TIF district. And again, we got the same situation there where we've got the ability to currently refund those bonds right now. And it's in two pieces. There's a bond issue out there, but in the capital markets, and there's also a Paycor note that we're going to refinance. The Series 2010 bonds have an average coupon out there at 4%, and then the Paycor note also has a 4% coupon on it as well. And so we are looking at refunding those bonds and also in the bond fund. That's a little bit of a higher rate. We're at about 2.6, 2.5% on those refinancing. And in this issue, the combined refinancing percentage is about 18%. And so this is pretty significant to the city because on this deal, over the life of the TIF, which goes out until 2038, we're going to save right around $1.3 million. And that's about $75,000 to $80,000 a year on average. And that is money that's, obviously can be used towards other public improvements out there that the city issues.
So in both situations, or it sounds like in Cornerstone, not in Linden Point, in Cornerstone, we are or very soon will be in a deficit position.
I wouldn't say the city specifically, but the developer is going to have to come out of pocket.
Yeah, well said. Yeah.
And then pass that along to the tenant.
I heard you make that comment in passing. Yeah.
Right, and then that could hurt as far as occupancy of Cornerstone. And if not as many people occupy Cornerstone, that hurts city income tax revenue. So.
Yeah, but the timing, and I guess urgency is too strong a word, but something similar to that is not because we're worried about what we've seen on TV in the past week or so about potentially interest rates going up a tick. It's really where we're saying we are or will be will be getting revenue that would cover our obligations. So we would be in a deficit. So we need to do this just to, he said, right the ship, but it's really just to make sure that we don't rely on the extra payments from the actual property manager.
And that's about $201,000 estimated this year.
So a question I did have a question on the Cornerstone one, so if we could just talk about that for just a split second. We actually were given two term sheets for those. It seemed like one of them had a 2% interest rate, one of them had a 2.8% interest rate. What was the interest rate that it's going to be for Cornerstone?
We don't know that specifically yet because we haven't priced the bonds. We're probably about a month away from pricing those issues. But on Cornerstone, give me a second to get back to right now in terms of the true interest cost, it's estimated at 2.04%, but I think that's going to be up a little bit higher from that. So that's Cornerstone. And then Linden Point.
Yeah.
The last number one we got, that was like about 2.65%.
Okay, great. And then do you know, you may not know this, I don't know, Patrick, if you might know this, but do you know why there's a Paycor note and then you have like the bonds? Can you, do you?
No, and I'm saying that's a great question. Like, why was it structured like that?
Yeah, I was just curious why there's the two, and then I'll have a few follow-up questions from that, but first, I just want to know if you all know.
I'll answer that question.
Yeah, I wasn't involved when they did it, but we've had some discussions to figure that out ourselves. And basically what they did, I believe, is they had a TIF area that was for Linden Point, and then they, that was in 2000, might even go back to 2007, but that was, the bonds that we're talking about here for Linden Point were issued in 2010. And I believe they I think they may have carved out of that TIF a specific area to finance improvements for Paycor. And so they did a similar arrangement there. They're not bonds sold to the open market, but they basically said, hey, we'll use the TIF payments from this specific Paycor development that was previously in the TIF to pay off this debt to finance improvements specifically to support the Paycor development. So they're basically similar, but they're just separate debt obligations that are financed from sort of two separate TIF areas in the same overall kind of development area.
It wasn't the first TIF, though, bigger than that which the second TIF is in it? Like, isn't the first TIF encompassing?
I think that they may have pulled it out to isolate the funds here, but I don't know if that's exactly how they did it, because I think that the Paycor may even be subordinate to the Linden Point. But I can go look through back all that and
Well,
trace it back to how they did it.
I think the question is, okay, so you're talking about the Linden Point bonds, and then we're talking about the Paycor note. Is the Paycor note, I mean, is that a bond? Is that, can you all say that? Or
It's a debt obligation. What they did is they basically entered into something that they called I forget if it was installment purchase contract or installment sale contract, where basically the funds from Paycor were used to build the public infrastructure improvements. And Paycor, as sort of the entity that funded that, is being repaid those amounts from the TIF generated by the site on which their new property or their new project was developed.
okay, so Paycor is the holder basically of the debt.
Yes, I believe so. Paycor or some entity out there. I don't know if it's Paycor itself, but I believe that's the case. Yeah, it's because that agreement was between. Again, I don't know if it's they have a development arm or if it's the company itself, but basically they said, hey, we will buy all this stuff, but as an incentive, we would like to be repaid from the TIF or a portion of the TIF to the extent our money was put in, plus the interest rate on it.
Okay, and then similar. I mean, do you have any questions on that specifically? Or?
I don't know if it's a question on that. I have a new question, but
Okay. So one step forward then. So in the new refinancing, what we're doing is we're combining both of those kind of bonds, right, into one this time.
Yeah, I think.
So,
go ahead.
So the question could be like separation of funds. So then, how do we ensure? I mean, is that even a worry that we should have? Basically, because with Cornerstone, if they didn't get enough money to pay the bond, then it goes to those tenants. Well, you've got Linden Point and Paycor, which are really two separate deals. How does that work when it comes to separation of the funds, or does that?
We have not gotten through all that. So technically on this, the quote bond council will be the Port Authority's bond council. But what we'll have to go back and look is what exactly the public improvements were that were financed with, for example, the Paycor debt. But at the end of the day, whatever we look at all the public improvements, right? And so there's a requirement that the TIF payments that are generated, there's a requirement that the TIF revenues generated by the private improvements are used to pay for public improvements that support or benefit the parcels upon which those private improvements are constructed. So we do have to make sure that a TIF over here isn't paying for public improvements over here that aren't benefiting this TIF area. And so up there in that area, if you're doing streets, roads, or the public infrastructure, you're pretty likely to be able to have them kind of cross-collateralized, but that is something we'd look at as once we get to the nuts and bolts of which revenues are used for which debt.
No, that's super helpful, and that makes sense. So I guess the question then would be, if there's a shortfall, and I don't imagine there will be. I mean, I think this puts us pretty comfortable in that Linden Point. But if there is a shortfall, who covers then the shortfall? Like, is it split between the two based on property values, or are all the parcels that are right there based on property values? I guess that's the concern that I have, because right now they're split. What if Paycor is going gangbusters, but the Linden Point side or some of the other things are not, and their property gets devalued? Does Paycor have to pick up that slack, basically?
I will go back and look to see how they did it. But typically in a situation like that, there won't be. So let's say, for example, if they were sort of separate, usually what you'd have is a service agreement or a similar agreement. Some people call it a TIF agreement, where if there is a shortfall, this entity has to come out of pocket to pick it up. But sometimes you'll have sort of a cross-collateralization where if this guy's TIF revenues are able to be used for public infrastructure that also supports this guy over here, you can cross-collateralize them to make them both sort of stronger. But we have to go back and look to see what those arrangements were and who made them, because those service agreements that you enter into at the beginning, just as an example, if the Linden Point debt, when they issued those bonds, that property owner would probably say something like, okay, I'm going to agree, in essence, to back up that debt, to make service payments if there's a shortfall to repay the debt. But they're not just going to say, whatever debt you take on, I'm going to make sure I back it up. It'll be tied to that debt, or there'll be some limitation on it. So I need to go back through all that and see exactly how how those two interact. Because again, I don't recall if they pulled Paycor out, or if it's more of a waterfall where it goes first to do all the Linden Point debt, which I think there's an arrangement like that even though it can be used for the second bit of debt, the Paycor still can be used to do Linden Point. Gotcha. And I think that the Linden Point arrangement may even be subordinate, or the Paycor obligation may still be subordinate to the obligation to pay the Linden Point bonds.
Gotcha.
I know that's kind of a circular logic, but that's something we'd have to go work through. I mean, ideally, for purposes of making sure the debt is as secured as well as it could be, you want them both to go either way. If there's a shortfall over here, it can be made up by this guy. If there's a shortfall over, they're cross-collateralized.
Yeah, and the public improvement, and that makes sense. And the public improvements on both sides are probably benefiting each other, like you just said. So, I mean, it's probably all very synergistic. It would be good for me, though, when we get to the council meeting, if we could, sometime before that, at least have some kind of an answer on just how that works. Because I think there's might be 2 current city funds that are paying those separate. I might be wrong. Maybe it is the same fund.
They are, because each TIF, it's required under the statute to have its own TIF fund.
Okay.
That has to be set up. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that they can't be used for other appropriate purposes, but each TIF area or TIF district, so when you pass an ordinance to establish either a project TIF, as they call it, or a TIF district, in connection with that, you do have to set up a separate fund. Now, obviously, funds are sometimes just on paper, but like when the state sends something every 6 months that says, okay, here's where your TIF payments came from, that's why we don't use Central Park to come up with to pay a shortfall on Cornerstone.
Oh, sure.
Because you can't really do that because of the public infrastructure improvements too. But yeah, we can put something together. We're gonna have to go. I don't know if the intent was to go to the meeting next week, but I don't think we're quite at that point.
I don't know what the
here.
intent.
I think we're talking about March 23rd.
March 20. Okay.
Yeah, so we have some time. So and when we talk with the port, like the analysis from the bond fund, they're almost like a bond investor themselves, right? Because they don't want to be supporting debt that isn't properly serviced itself. So we're going to have to go through with them and with Andy, obviously, as the financial advisor to the city, to look in great detail of all these things, how it all works, so that we can document it correctly in the bond documents that are going to be created to support the bond fund debt.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
But yeah, we're happy, and we can interface with Tom. If you guys, anything you need from him, I mean, we can put together and sort of parse out through these hundreds of pages of documents and try to give it in more layman's terms of how these things work, for sure.
Sure. Okay. Thank you so much.
Sure.
I had a quick, this is not a follow-up, it's fairly separate, but is it okay or appropriate to summarize the situations as Linden Point, since it currently and probably will have TIF revenue sufficient enough to cover things, that $80K or so in savings, I know that we don't have the interest rate locked, that roughly $80,000, does that could we put that to the general fund in subsequent years?
You're not able to in subsequent. Well, here's how it works. So basically,
next year, you couldn't you?
Not next year either.
You have to
the
wait
way it
till
works,
the TIF fund expires, or use it in the deal.
So it has to be used for the public infrastructure improvements that were authorized in the original TIF ordinance, which includes paying debt service on debt incurred to pay for those improvements. But it can't be used for any other purposes too, which is good, so it can't be sort of sucked out. But at the end of the day, once the TIF expires, that money then goes to the general fund to be used for whatever those funds go.
When's that expire?
What's that?
When's that expire?
I think that was created in 07, so I think 37 or 38.
2037.
Correct.
Yeah.
37.
16 years from now.
I mean, a big build-up.
Yeah, I mean, it's
If I can jump in here real quick,
Yeah.
I want to clarify the interest rates because they told you 4%. The Paycor note right now, we're paying 5% interest
Okay.
on that issue. And then on the debt service for the bond that was done in 2010, those rates are 6% to 7%.
That better matches what I have. Perfect.
And when we talk about the TIF fund, and we run some analysis, I'll shoot these to Tom, and you guys can look at them. But we've run the model for this TIF district, and so right now it looks about 127. It varies a little bit, but starts at about $150,000 in extra cash flow right now. It goes all the way up to about $500,000 a year at the end of 2037. So with the refinancing, the cash flow would grow from about $380,000 a year of excess cash flow from the TIF all the way up to the last year. It's $843,000.
Yep.
Annually.
Thank you.
So this is a significant reduction in interest savings, and all can go towards the TIF fund. And we've seen a lot of other communities. This is a conversation that Tom and I had with the mayor, that other communities are utilizing these TIF funds as matches for roadway improvements in the area, stuff like that, sidewalk improvements, other public infrastructure improvements that are permissible under the TIF legislation, which is what Pat was describing.
Right, and Pat, can you kind of just, in layman's terms a little bit, it has to be substantially related to the public infrastructure on the TIF site, right? Essentially, that's...
It basically has to, it's either benefit or directly benefit depending on the type of TIF. But the way that they've looked at that legally is essentially that if the private improvements result in a greater use of those public improvements, they can determine that it benefits from it. So the easiest thing is roads and sidewalks, things like that, or parking garages that people can see with their two eyeballs every day. If you put something in place, a new private improvement goes up, and there's TIF revenues. If those TIF revenues are used for roadways that are going to be used more due to that development has benefited from those roadways. And I'd say roadways just because that's something that is very common use form, parking. It's just a reality that the private development really increases the use and wear and tear on those types of improvements, and they're always needed. And developers consider them to be needed for their development, so that's a pretty common use of them. But up in, you see big parking lots up in Linden Point, those clearly benefit those private developments. I mean, they're almost...
There are quite a few roads that run towards Linden Point, so that, again, like you were saying, could be, I don't know if it was you or Andy, but it could be a matching fund.
And it's in utilities, something like that. Just as an example, if you wanted to build because people think that it has to be within the TIF district or something, it's not necessarily the case. If you wanted to build a water tower or increase the capacity of your water facilities, it can be 2 miles away. But if they need to increase the capacity of it because of a new private development, that private development is still directly benefiting from those public improvements. So you could use TIF funds for that purpose. That's just an example that seems to make a little sense. But that's the general idea, is that it benefits from those public improvements.
Yeah. I think overall, just from this conversation, I think it probably would be, at some point, maybe after we get these refinancings done, to do an evaluation. I mean, I know you all have probably done an evaluation of all of our TIF funds, but I think it might be good to do that and see which ones we're projecting there's going to be surpluses in over the next few years, and what some of those opportunities might be to
pull out.
Yeah, to do some public infrastructure improvements around those sites, or that directly benefit those sites. So.
Yeah, and Andy, I know, has been, at least, this is how this situation came up here, through his evaluation of the existing TIF. So I don't know if he's gone through all of them. I think he's focused probably so far on the ones that have the ability to be refinanced here in the short term. But for all of them, I mean, it is something to keep tabs on. This shouldn't just, unfortunately, some of these, because of circumstances outside the city's control, have not been performing as well. But some of them are performing very, very well. And so, it is, like you said, something to keep tabs on and regularly evaluate.
Yeah.
And Andy, I don't know, you can probably talk a little bit more about your firm, but that's essentially why we brought him on, was to evaluate all of our TIFs and just help us make good decisions moving forward.
Yeah, and so we've done. We'll forward these to you. They're still preliminary because the debt obviously isn't refinanced yet. But so we've done projections on Linden Point, Cornerstone. We just wrapping up Central Park. And so, as Pat mentioned, all of these are performing well with the exception of Cornerstone, but, I think with refinancing, that'll help stabilize that deal as well. We're going to then dive into the other items for you. That's the Brookwood transaction and University Station. So we'll be evaluating all those to see if there's opportunities to refinance and save money, and ultimately drive the revenues back to the city at some point.
That was great. Thanks.
So I had another question about the fees at the back. So, I'm not an expert on, the estimated cost of issuance, but for Cornerstone, it looked like the fees were about like 5.12% or somewhere 5.3%. And then for Linden Point, it was 5.6% basically. And those are just like fees just a percentage of fees based on the overall bond issuance. Could you speak maybe, Andrew, to that and just let us know, like, is that does that typical for what you kind of see when you work with other municipalities? Is that maybe a little bit higher for some reason or a little bit lower?
Yeah, because we're going through the bond fund, those fees are going to be a little bit higher than normal. The nice item, we evaluate looking at some of these on our own and just refinancing through the city. But because of the lower interest rate with the bond fund, that's why we brought in the Port Authority. So we have Port Authority fees we have to pay as well to the port upfront on an annual basis. And so it does drive the cost up, and it's something we evaluated. But on these TIF transactions, they're pretty complicated. There's a lot of attorneys involved from different sides, and so when you look at deals of these size, yeah, that's in the range of fees that would be charged for these types of deals. The other ones that we're going to be looking at for the city, we're going to take a hard look as well and see if just reissuing through the city as a TIF revenue bond as it is right now, if that is a benefit, or we should go back to the Port Authority again. and some of it's based upon the credit strength of the TIF. So we just got to dive into all those different variables of it to see what's the best route for the city.
Okay, thank you.
One more point on that, because you mentioned percentages. The smaller the deal, the larger the percentages, because some of these, there's a certain amount of work that has to be done by all the attorneys, and so that can also kill a deal too, right? I mean, that's whenever you've got the smaller transaction, we're trying to do is combine a lot of these together. And so when we talked to the Port Authority, we said, hey, we'll do these two together in a way, with the attorneys that are involved, and that helps keep some of the fees down.
Okay, thank you.
That's a question for me.
Anything else I could describe, answer, help with?
Fine. The rest of the members are. Thank you both for the presentation.
Yeah, and I think as far as next step, we're on the same page. We're just going to, advance this, assuming that everybody agrees that the ultimate goal of saving, reducing interest rates here and saving money is in everybody's best interest. We'll just obviously proceed, and then whatever you need between now and, like I said, between Tom, get whatever you think is helpful to, for your evaluation at the full council meeting. Just let me know or Andy know, and we'll get whatever you need.
Yeah.
Andy, as far as timeline goes, do you mind mentioning really quick? I think that we're trying to get these out by the middle of April, right? So
yeah. I mean, obviously, especially for Cornerstone, I mean, that's so sensitive. I mean, the longer we wait on Cornerstone, it just hurts the ability to save money this year in terms of interest. So, help them with the cash flow situation. So we're pushing this as fast as we can with the board. I've got a phone call with the underwriter of the board tomorrow, and I believe we've got our first kickoff call next week to try to, stay on task, keep this moving along and get this completed as quickly as possible.
Yeah. Does our law department already working on the ordinances for these? Like,
I believe bond.
we're
They
not.
had mentioned that you guys.
Yeah, we'll work on it. Usually what would happen is that we would do at least an initial review of some of the documents sorry, this is there will be, part of this is going to be a cooperative agreement between the city and the Port Authority. And that is the agreement pursuant to which you will be essentially assigning the TIF revenues to them to go through the bond fund structure to pay the bond fund bonds. And so we'll want to work with them to get initial pass through those documents to have those generally agreed upon, and then we'll approve the form of those in connection with the ordinance. But yes, we're working on that, but we'll want to have the kickoff and have at least a turn of those documents before we come and say we've got kind of a deal that we can have approved by the council. But yes, we're working towards getting all that documentation and legislation in place.
Okay, cool. Yeah, because it'd just be good. I mean, it sounds like we're not gonna have the final numbers, but it'd be good to get all of this stuff done concurrently. So when Andrew's ready, or if I don't know exactly what the order of operations are, but that way we can get it
Yeah, and
ready to go. So.
I represent the city of Cincinnati in a lot of deals that they do through the Port Authority too. So we have, and the team that's working on it, they're involved in these types of transactions pretty commonly. So we all have a pretty good knowledge of each other and how it should work, and so it shouldn't be overly complicated once we sort of get approval from the bond fund, and once we're like, okay, we're all on board here. Once we get to that point, it should be pretty, expedient to get the documentation and legislation for review to you all.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I'm assuming though we'll probably put that on as an emergency on the 23rd though, just so we can get those out by April.
I'll defer to the
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's no other option.
elected officials on that one.
Yeah.
Oh,
I know the council doesn't really like that, but hopefully.
No, I mean, for things like this, it makes total sense. I mean, once you know you're going to act, you want to put the emergency clause on it so that you don't have to wait that 30 days. I mean, it's.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those cases where it's not as much, it's a quantifiable reason for doing that, as opposed to sort of a subjective one that exists in some circumstances. But again, I'm not going to weigh in on that, but that's that's the way I look at some things like that.
I hear you. Yeah, no, it makes sense.
Sure. Okay.
perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
It sounds like we had folks who also joined us as guests who wanted to comment on this agenda.
Yeah. Okay, so Pastor Sonny James, right here in Norwood. Andy and Pat, a wonderful presentation. I think from the residents' perspective, I think what made it worthwhile for me to even attend tonight is when Mr. DiNardo asked the question about the expiration. And I think from residents' perspective, when you're talking about a lot of money, and I do appreciate the fact that we have the Port Authority really involved, because as we know, even with more recent developments, Port Authority is really committed to making sure that there's a great diverse effort going forward. I was hoping that the expiration was going to be much sooner, because the main thing that we're talking about, I mean, it's nice when you can save $1.5 million, but then if that could affect the general fund, and the timeline that could affect the general fund would actually put the city financially in a better position as we move forward with economic inclusion and things like that in respect to our FRP. So I want to commend this committee for making sure that we slow things down. And as the residents can hear, there's still some things that are still kind of in limbo, and answers that we don't rightly have for the general public. And I applaud the fact that we're slowing it down. In the 23rd, I agree, that's an important date. And I also agree that we need to move forward. I'm not sure how much of a legal challenge, I know you guys have tons of attorneys working on it, but I don't know how much of a legal challenge has been presented in terms of making sure that we cross our T's and dot our I's. And I know the city of Cincinnati does a lot of these things, but as history has shown, sometimes after we aggressively approach these things, Tom, and from the mayor's office, as we aggressively approach these things, we oftentimes look back and go, oops, we missed that little detail that's kind of important to the later end of what we could have done today to help us structure and set things up for tomorrow. And as most of you all know, my biggest push obviously is economic inclusion, and making sure that all of the available dollars and funds that we have flowing through our city at some point have some connection to where everybody can be a key player at the table. And so I just want to stand and kind of speak in layman's terms for the residents that might be listening going, what was all that? There is a lot to consume. There is a lot to listen to. But the reality is, the TIFs have been an issue. I think Mr. Bonzo has been here longer than any of you. And the TIFs, these types of issues, especially surrounding our FRP, are a key issue for the city of Cincinnati, city of Norwood. And so I just want to applaud you all as you aggressively approach these things. Just keep in mind, 2037 really isn't that far off. It may seem like it is, but it's really not, because it's right around the corner, you know. I can remember it was 1976, not too long ago, year of independence. And so as we move forward as a community, I just want to really challenge the fact that although we have to wait till 2037, that we really have a mindset that when these things fully mature, that those savings and those dollars are a key focus within the general fund for us, because then we can earmark more of those dollars that can help divide or unify a lot of our economic disparities. And you all know my whole position, so I think that's very important. So God bless you all. Continue to strive. Continue to take our time with this from the administration's perspective. Take our time and make sure that we cross our T's and dot our I's. And I know April's a set target, but I think we really want to make sure that we get this one right, because there's so much at the table. And you're talking about this type of money and the savings, you know, in several years, you know, a few $1 million here and there, that could really change the dynamic of this whole city with the population that it is. It could really have a significant impact. So, Andy and Pat and Andy, I'm sorry. You guys keep up the great work. Make sure we just continue to cross our T's, dot our I's. Great job for this committee addressing this on tonight before we get before council. As you know, a lot of times we'll say, oh, I just got this information and I don't have all the information, but yet we then have to vote on it. And that just makes us look bonehead crazy. So we want to just continue to move in the right direction. I was so pleased to hear someone say, hey, so when could we transition this to the general fund? Because as we know, the funds that go in that fund, if it's appropriated right, we can make a huge difference. So kudos, good job. And to the residents out there, be patient with this committee, because this is not an easy issue. There's a lot on the table. You've got experts here coming in trying to do the best that they can, rely upon their expertise. But at the end of the day, from our administration's perspective, we just slow it down, make sure we cross our T's, dot our I's, so that the residents can gain confidence knowing you guys were really on top of this stuff with all your expertise and things like that. And I'll be hanging out in the wings, just, you know, checking, yeah, making sure. That's right. But good job, guys. Let's keep it up, and appreciate this committee for taking this head on and bringing it to the community. I mean, the administration, but yeah. I mean, coming through this committee, giving the residents an opportunity to at least hear this issue, whether they understand it or not. Having them hear it and then bring it to the general council, that's an awesome step, and I applaud that. God bless.
Thanks, Tom and James, for bringing it up.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Andrew.
So the only other agenda item was, I wrote FRP 2021 preliminary discussion, and I think it is somewhat timely in that on this coming general council meeting, we may have, you know, what will be presented to us. It depends. I think I heard from Jim. It depends on a few open items and questions that he has with the state auditor. But the long and the short of it is, it's probably not going to be materially different than the draft that we got. Say 2 and almost 3 weeks ago, and so what we get on the 9th is either going to look a heck of a lot like, or be the plan, our first pass at the plan. So knowing that, Chris, James, do you have any?
Chris, did you get a draft copy of the plan?
Nope.
Okay.
Capital improvement plan. When was?
No. Well, the actual financial recovery plan. I can.
Yeah. No. Nobody sent it to me. So I was just looking for.
I got one.
I think. Yeah. I think. I think Jim sent it to you and I just to have a first look, but I don't think he ever sent it. But that was over a month ago, so okay. I can go print this off for him real quick if.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Did you just get the capital improvements plan?
Yeah.
Then, Chris, is that what you asked for? Got it. Because I was like, I know that you talked about the capital improvements plan.
Yeah, that was it. That was all.
That was
I've
the
seen.
specific thing
Yeah.
that you got. Okay.
Do you have anything else for me?
You're a big help. Thank you.
What's that?
You're a big help. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Like I said, if anybody has any questions about details of it, happy to. I know it's sometimes you forget, you know, you do it all the time that you're not speaking the language that other people are. So part of my job is to help people kind of discuss it in English. So anytime. Cool. Appreciate y'all. Have a good night.
You too.
Thank you.
You know, you gotta help a brother out.
What's that?
So you know you have to help a brother out.
Well, I appreciate you helping me out by getting the door open down there.
Appreciate you.
I've been stuck out there all night.
Chris, did you schedule time to meet with Jim?
Do what?
Are you going to meet with Jim again, or was the capital improvements plan what you were most looking for?
The latest one I seen, I liked.
Sorry about that. You're having copyright issues, so you keep that and I'll pull mine out. Okay, so the draft that we have, do you have your copy here?
No, but I
Okay.
spoke to Jim kind of on some stuff. So
Cool, yeah.
Yeah.
The draft that we have is, it's about a month old, so, yeah, I'm sorry that you did not get that, Mr. Kelch. I didn't even see who it was sent to back then, so. So the good thing is that there is a draft capital improvement plan attached to it, and it does get us, it gets us definitely a lot closer to being back to normal, like a normal operating city when it comes to not having vehicles that are, braking while they're driving down the road, and having built, like we've got windows here, new windows in council chambers, which I actually didn't know they were doing, but I noticed it tonight. So we're finally kind of investing in the buildings in the buildings around the city to try to keep us preserved, where we've really just been neglecting this for the last 20, 30, 40 years. So capital improvement plan, just everyone knows at home, it just continues that investment basically. So right now I think it's projecting after all of the different items, let's see here, it's projecting at the end of 2021 around a $4.7 million cash balance. I think right at the end of last year it was like a $6.5 million cash balance. End of 2021 is projecting 4.7, and then it kind of continually goes down for a couple of years as we keep reinvesting into the city and getting capital projects done, until we get to the end of 2025, till we kind of maintain an average cash balance at the end of the year around $2 million, a little bit under $2 million. And I think at that point, we'll see the future plans, because I imagine that we'll keep redoing a plan like this. Hopefully the future finance
Every year.
committee we'll insist on that. But I think we'll see that cash balance of the year about $2 million. So I think we're going to see, at least in this plan overall, you're going to see a lot of investment back into the city over the next 4 to 5 years, and this thing will get revised every year. Whether it be parks and, like I said, other things, until we kind of get back to a more normal and stable state. This plan still takes into account that we're going to have earnings tax like we've had it in the past, right? That we're still going to have employers here in office buildings and such. Essentially like we had, contrary to what we've had during the pandemic where we've had so many people at home, but we're still getting earnings tax because of the a law at the General Assembly basically that said that you're paying earnings tax based on where your employer is, not based on where you live. So, or where you were basically pre-pandemic. So anyways, long story short about all of that is that it just kind of, this plan overall just maintains status quo, other than the investment, but it doesn't have any dramatic changes when it comes to really any specific departments or anything. It kind of maintains what the previous plan had. It just increases, it looks like, capital expenditures significantly. And there's some departments you'll see like significantly more. Recreation, we're going to have a full-time rec director in the future, and it looks like 2 more full-time positions in rec to help manage that. It hasn't been decided what those positions are, but it's kind of, we're budgeting on that, I guess, knowing that we are going to have a new recreation center for our residents. And honestly, I think as Chris's committee, the Parks Committee, Recreation Committee has done, I mean, we're trying, the goal is to revitalize recreation. I mean, it's been kind of being held together, I would say, rather courageously by 2 people for so long. And now we're going to get to the point where we need to normalize that too. So you'll see specific departments like that have like changes, but there's nothing, I mean, in my review of it, there's nothing super surprising or groundbreaking or anything else. I mean, we're actually going to start acting like a normal city, which is, which is great. And I think this is, you remind me if I'm wrong, I think 2021, is this the last year I think this is our last year that we're paying on our general fund bond that we issued back in, I don't remember, decade ago. I think they refinanced it. So I mean, I think we're done paying on general fund bonds after this year as well. So I mean, the city's just really, we're setting it up for a very good financial place, and I think the goal will be, let's keep it that way. I think the current city administration is gonna, their priorities in the plan show that they want to keep it that way. But
I think the comment I touched on in my conversations with Jim that I want to share, I don't know if it'll be the 9th or on the 23rd, is to make sure that we're talking to our president, Ken Miracle, about officially getting out of fiscal emergency at the same time that we're passing this. I think that the plan, we've demonstrated in 2020, and the plan in 2021 continues to demonstrate more than solvent, pretty good, doing all the things we're supposed to do. I think there are a couple admin things left over, like, there was, tick box that he's managing. But this really should be a 2021 get out of fiscal emergency by the end of the year. I think it's possible. I think it's probable. And so I'd like to make sure that we're having that conversation at the same time that we're passing 2021's FRP. So, Chris, I know you just got it, but.
Yeah, no, I think, and while he's reviewing it, I think that's a great point. I know I've talked to multiple department heads that feel like they're doing everything they can to try to, I guess I'd say elected officials, that feel like they're doing everything they can to try to get us out of fiscal emergency, but that, they're dependent in part on the state reviewing some of these things and signing off. Now, I think there's other things that still need to be done, but when it comes to the report on accounting methods and all the recommendations
that they
have.
That's right, the admin thing I'm talking about.
Yeah, no, you're fine. No, I mean, I think that's, Ken Miracle's trying to push as well, and there's been frustration. I'm just hoping that I agree with you. I think that we need to send a message of urgency that we want out by the end of the year. And, I just be personal. Like, I mean, this could be my last year on council, right? It could be all of our last year on council, and I want to send this thing out with a bang. You know what I mean? I want to make sure that I'd love to pass this off with us not being a fiscal emergency to the next council. and really to our residents, frankly. I mean, it just empowers the city to be much more nimble and flexible. As good as it's been to be in fiscal emergency from a conservative spending standpoint and a conservative outlook standpoint, and the financial supervisors have been helpful in many respects onto providing ideas for ways that we can save money and such. But I think it's time that I agree with Eric. That it's time that we kind of move this forward, stand on our own 2 feet.
Hey, Chris, if you want to keep reviewing, I saw Mr. Tim Gary came in. On the agenda was a segment on open and significant claims against the city. Is that something that you have prepared, or we can wait until the next committee meeting if you don't?
I don't have that prepared. I can tell you there hasn't been a lot.
Okay.
Now, having said that, God gives us potholes in March and April and so on. And having said that, because the council ordained a greater allowance for us.
Could you
to
talk
settle
at the
claims.
microphone or this microphone?
Actually, that's a good idea.
This one's fine if you want to talk at that one. Just so people can hear it at home, if you don't mind.
There haven't been a lot of new claims presented in the last several months, and I'll be able to address it more next time.
Yeah.
The one thing that I do have, this isn't in the nature of claims, but I did prepare a memo for you guys to look at relating to what's going on next week.
With the public hearing?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So are you gonna? Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I'm sure you can distribute it to us whenever you're ready.
Right.
So.
Yeah, it's probably not a finance committee thing, but
Not directly, no.
Could you? So we did pass the ordinance last year to change the amount that could be done between the law director and the auditor together.
Yeah.
Do you know? Have we had any claims that have been paid out based on that ordinance?
No,
And then
not of which I'm aware.
okay, yeah, I'm sure you would be aware if there were, no doubt. The other question is, are we kind of have we ruled out some claims based on that ordinance in the sense that has the law department, have you all reviewed things and just felt like, we're just not going to pay that?
Not based on that ordinance, but for example, there was a request to pay to remove a tree and to repair, I think, some decking or something on a property over on Globe or something like that. And the funny thing about it was that this was a recent buyer who was making a claim based upon some damage that had already occurred. And it really didn't look like he had any claim under the law, and so we told him that, and we haven't heard from him since.
Okay, good.
And that's somewhat typical. My hope is that this software thing through Public Works might be helpful. Yeah, Click Fix or whatever in the world it is.
Click Fix, yep.
Yeah,
I'm
because
sure
that would,
you'll know if the city's been notified. I mean,
yeah, and that's makes it a whole lot simpler for us.
yeah, because I think we don't want to be unfair to residents if
Right.
we were notified a month ago or 2 months ago about a specific pothole and it wasn't fixed and somebody hit it. I mean that the city could be liable at that point. But
But tends to be the exception, not the rule.
right, yeah.
I mean, I know, for example, that in some instances, Public Works has gone out within a few minutes of when, claims have been called in to look for where, stuff to repair.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
Sure.
Is there any actions that you see as finance committee? I mean, based on, I know that you can't, you're not going to be able to say like, yes, you should do this, but are there any actions that you think that we should take right now, just based on claims? Should we kind of wait for more direction from the law department? Is there anything that you think we should be doing right now?
Not that I can identify at this point.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I don't know. No.
Okay.
Okay.
I guess I would say, I mean, I guess the door is open probably, to reach out to Eric or to send an email to the committee if you've got a claim that you think that's over the amount or that you don't want to make a decision, you want us to make a decision on. But overall, I'm hopeful that we can kind of leave that decision making on some of that to, again, the auditor and the law director, just so that, because again, I'm not a legal mind. I don't know what our culpability or liability, I'm hoping that we can keep moving forward like we've been doing, right, and not have to interview individual claimants on council floor, basically, like we've kind of had to do in the past. So
Hasn't really happened in 2020, so.
no, we did it in 2019 though, and that was like.
And the very, like the first meeting or two in 2020 maybe, pre-COVID, I think.
We definitely talked about claims. I don't know if we had like.
We didn't do.
We had that gentleman on Wakefield Place. That,
you're right. Never mind. I tell it. Yeah.
Do it.
I was thinking that was early 2020 or something, but I may be wrong.
It might have been the end of 2019. I think we interviewed him at the end of 2019. We recommended something in 2020 to the new committee, and don't remember what happened to it, but he might have withdrawn that one specifically. I think the guy that hit the pothole thing on Wakefield Place, that his name started with a W. I don't want to say it out loud, but because it doesn't matter at this point. But Wolfgang. So. But yeah, okay. Well, I personally feel good about this, and we're in a good spot right now.
Were you hoping to read the memo, or you just wanted to distribute it?
Okay.
No,
yeah.
This is privileged.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your time, Mr. Gary, as always.
Sure.
I think we're blessed to have you here, frankly.
Well, that's the agenda items, but I didn't want to cut Chris because I know he's rocking. Or is that something you just want to have?
I'm moving quick.
Okay.
We could talk. Have you by chance had any? We'll get to give him a minute. Have you by chance had any conversations with the financial supervisors about that subject, about getting out of fiscal emergency? Or?
No, it's only talking to people in the city. I haven't. I actually need to speak to Ken next on that.
Thanks for coming.
Or Mr. Miracle.
Thank you for coming. Yeah, that makes sense. It could be. I would just say you as the finance chair. You should probably feel free to reach out to them anytime if you have questions, and by email. Email is probably a good first method, but I wouldn't be bashful if there's concerns you have like that. Like, call them and let them know, and let them explain to you what's going on, so you have that firsthand knowledge. I know I did, and I don't know if they always liked hearing from me, but I reached out when there were issues for sure.
Got it.
So.
Good advice, thanks.
Yeah, no.
You good?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, that wraps it up, and we'll hear more about the plan, whether it be in formal version or in another draft on the 9th. So that'll be the first time that we, the residents, will hear us kind of more formally talk about it on general council floor. So, thank you.